Zara stepped out of the small rust-roofed shack she called home, her tiny feet carefully navigating the uneven stony path that led out of Alua, a forgotten edge of Banu City where electricity came in whispers and water had to be fetched from the community borehole. Clutched in her hand was a faded blue lunchbox, its latches barely holding onto the edges. Inside was jollof rice cooked with love and patience, and topped with a small, precious piece of goat meat, her only proper meal for the day. Her mother, Miriam, had woken up before the cockerel's cry to make it, using the last bits of palm oil and seasoning she had saved from the day before. As always, Miriam left shortly after cooking, carrying her basket of okra, bitter leaf, and Scotch bonnet peppers to the central market where she would haggle for every naira. Zara, just 9 years old but with the poise of someone twice her age, walked with a quiet determination that didn't belong to someone so small. Her backpack, once bright pink but now dusty brown, bounced lightly with every step. She always passed the same cracked bakery wall, its painted sign now a ghost of its former self. And just beyond it, beneath the shade of a wide neem tree, sat the old man. He was always there, cross-legged, still as stone, resting against the tree with his head down and hands wrapped around himself as if he were trying to hold his body together. His clothes were riddled with holes, more patch than fabric, and his bare feet were dry and cracked like parched earth. The children of Alua were warned not to go near him. He might be mad, they were told. He could be dangerous. But something in Zara's heart pushed past the warnings that morning. Maybe it was the way the sun hit his frail shoulders, or how the flies buzzed freely around his untouched bowl made of a broken plastic plate. Or maybe it was the way his eyes barely opened, sunken and defeated. Zara stopped walking. Her grip on her lunchbox tightened. Her stomach growled softly in protest. She remembered the coconut candy and chin-chin Auntie Nella had brought from McCurdy 2 nights ago. They were in her bag for break time. That might be enough to hold her. She bit her lower lip, took a breath, turned around, and walked slowly toward the old man. He didn't notice her at first. His head hung low, his eyes half closed. But when her shadow fell across his feet, he stirred. Slowly, he raised his head and blinked at her. His gaze didn't hold suspicion or hostility, just emptiness. Zara knelt beside him and placed the lunchbox on the ground before him. "Grandpa, I want you to eat this," she said softly. "It's rice and meat." For a moment, he just stared. Then his lips parted, and in a voice hoarse and broken, he asked, "You're giving me your food?" Zara nodded. "I have snacks. I'll be okay." Silence settled like a fog. Then tears, real and raw, welled up in the old man's eyes. They didn't fall gently. They stormed down his cheeks, unstoppable. His shoulders shook violently as he held the lunchbox to his chest like a sacred relic. Zara, confused but steady, reached out and touched his shoulder. "Don't cry, Grandpa. It's okay." He looked at her again, really looked. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Zara," she replied. "Zara," he repeated, as if tasting the name, as if it was holy. "Bless you, my angel. Bless you forever." Across the dusty street, people paused briefly, then walked on. But Zara stayed a moment longer, then smiled, stood, and skipped toward the school gate. The old man watched her go, his eyes still shining, the box still clutched to his chest. When she disappeared into the school compound, he slowly opened the box. The aroma hit him like a wave, real food, warm jollof rice, soft and fragrant. a perfect piece of meat glistening on top like a crown on treasure. He hadn't tasted anything close to this in weeks. Most days he scavenged for crumbs. Some days he ate nothing at all. With trembling hands, he picked up the plastic spoon tucked into the corner and scooped a bite into his mouth. The flavors overwhelmed him. Not just the spice or the seasoning, but the kindness, the love, the hope in every grain. It filled more than his stomach. It cracked open something buried deep inside. Her name echoed in his mind. Zara. Later that afternoon, after school ended, Zara skipped home as usual, humming a song only she knew. Her stomach grumbled faintly. The candy hadn't been enough, but her heart was full. As she opened the crooked wooden door, her mother was squatting in the corner peeling cassava. Miriam looked up and smiled, but then her face turned serious. "Zara, where is your lunchbox?" Zara froze. Her fingers tightened around her school bag. "I gave it away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To the man near the school gate. He looked so hungry." Miriam dropped the cassava. "You did what?" Zara swallowed. "He was very hungry. I gave him my food, but I ate the candy Auntie Nayla brought. I was okay." Miriam stood and wiped her hands on her wrapper. She walked over, her face stern. "Zara, we are not rich. We don't have food to waste. That was your only meal today." Zara stepped closer. "You always say to help people when we can. That's what I did." Miriam sighed, her anger battling pride. She knelt, bringing herself eye to eye with her daughter. "Yes," she said slowly, "I did teach you that. Kindness is beautiful, but you must also be wise. You're a child. You shouldn't talk to strangers. This world isn't always kind." "But he was hungry," Zara said simply. "He cried when I gave him food." Miriam looked at her daughter, and something shifted in her chest, a mixture of fear and admiration. She pulled Zara into a hug and whispered, "Don't stop being kind. Just be careful." That night, as Zara lay beside her mother on their thin mattress, the rain tapped gently on their rusted roof. She thought of the old man. Who was he? Why was he always alone? Why did no one else see him? In her mind, he was now Grandpa. She decided that's what she'd call him. She didn't know that the man people passed every day without a glance was once a giant. His name had been Obinna Maxwell Anya, a Nigerian-American billionaire who built his real estate empire from nothing. He had once graced magazine covers, donated to orphanages, funded hospitals, and created scholarships for children he never met. At 62, he returned to Nigeria to oversee his legacy, a new chapter after decades in America. But something had gone wrong. No one knew exactly how he vanished. His number stopped working. His children tried to trace him, but there were no clues. He became a ghost, swallowed by dust and heat and time, until a little girl with nothing gave him everything. The next morning, Miriam rose earlier than usual. She mashed the last beans they had into small balls and fried them into akara. Then she made a decision. She placed 4 hot balls on a brown paper sheet and folded them neatly. When Zara entered the kitchen rubbing her eyes, her mother handed the package to her. "Give this to your old friend," she said. Zara blinked. "Really?" Miriam nodded. "But listen, you must always tell me first. We don't have much, but as long as we have something, we can share a little." Zara nodded quickly. That morning, her steps were lighter than ever. When she turned the corner, Grandpa was there again, sitting quietly. She walked up, handed him the food without a word. He looked at her with reverence, accepted the package, and smiled. "My little angel," he whispered, and from that day on the name stayed. Every morning, Miriam would prepare something small, sometimes roasted plantain, sometimes boiled maize. Even on days when all they had were 2 dry biscuits, she made sure Zara never went empty-handed. People in the village began to notice. Some whispered, some scoffed, but Zara didn't care. Her mission was simple. Grandpa must eat. And so it went for days, then weeks, until the morning that changed everything. 2 visitors arrived in Alua from the University of Maryland, both Nigerian Americans on a field study of rural development. The younger one, Kalichi, was a lively researcher with a camera always swinging on his neck. The older, Emeka, was quieter, more introspective. As they strolled through the village, Emeka stopped dead in his tracks. There, under the neem tree, sat the man he thought he'd never see again. "No," he breathed. "It can't be." He stepped closer, knees trembling. "Daddy?" The old man looked up slowly. No reaction, just blank eyes. "Daddy," Emeka repeated, voice cracking. Still nothing. Kalichi ran up. "Who is this?" Emeka turned to him, heart in his throat. "This is my father." The man they had buried in their minds, the man they had grieved without a grave. "We thought he was dead." The old man just stared, silent, distant, alive, but not really. Emeka rushed to the palace of Alua and begged the chief for shelter. He couldn't leave his father on the streets. The king, wise and moved, offered a hut behind the palace wall and assigned 2 guards to watch over him. And every morning after that, the old man sat under the tree by his hut, his eyes searching, until one day he spoke, only 4 words. "Bring me my angel." Emeka was stunned. "Who?" The old man's voice was firm. "The girl who feeds me." Emeka's heart raced. He had to find her, and on the other side of the village, Zara was walking to school, holding her small food parcel as always, her eyes searching the tree. But Grandpa was gone. Zara had never walked so slowly to school before in her life. The morning air was cooler than usual, and the sky had that pale blue tint that usually made her feel peaceful. But today it only deepened her sense of sadness. She clutched the small parcel of roasted sweet potato her mother had wrapped for Grandpa and glanced constantly toward the old bakery wall. The neem tree stood silent, still casting its wide shadow over the spot where Grandpa always sat, but the space was empty, like a missing tooth in a familiar smile. Each day since he disappeared, she had carried food anyway, placing it gently on the ground, hoping he would reappear, and each day she returned after school to find it untouched. Sometimes the food was gone, but the wrapper left behind. Most times it remained exactly where she left it. This morning was no different. Her eyes scanned the bend in the path, her heart tightening with every step, and as she turned the final corner and saw that the spot remained empty, something inside her gave way. She stopped walking completely. Her legs refused to move. Her lips pressed into a line. She blinked several times and then slowly sat down on a rock nearby, holding the parcel to her chest. Her mind flooded with questions. Where did he go? Was he sick? Did someone take him? Had he died without saying goodbye? Her mother had tried to comfort her the night before, telling her that maybe Grandpa had found a better place to rest. But Zara didn't believe that something told her he hadn't gone willingly. The man who once wept over her lunchbox, who called her angel, would not have left without a word, not unless something had happened across the village inside the small guest room of the palace. Emeka sat beside his father, watching the old man stare blankly at the wall since bringing him into the palace. The days had been slow and heavy. The doctors who examined him said it was trauma-induced memory loss, the mind protecting itself from something it couldn't handle. He rarely spoke, he ate when fed, he bathed when guided, he responded to no name, not even his own. But that one phrase haunted Emeka. He had called out for his angel, not his son, not his family, not his name, but the little girl who gave him food. Emeka knew then that he had to find her. It wasn't about gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, a thread of light that might lead them back to the man they lost the next day. Emeka left the palace with his friend Kalichi. They asked around the village, beginning with the school gate. They spoke to a woman roasting corn, a fruit seller, a group of children no one knew until they reached an old woman selling firewood. Her eyes squinted as Emeka described the little girl, respectful, smiling, always in a school uniform. The old woman leaned forward, pointed with her chin toward a narrow path cutting through the cassava field. "Follow that," she said, "until you reach a mud house with a mango tree. The mother sells at the market. They live there." Emeka didn't waste a second. He grabbed Kalichi's arm and the two hurried down the path, hearts pounding. They reached the small home and knocked gently. A moment later, the creaky wooden door opened, and there she was standing barefoot in the doorway. Her braids tied neatly, her eyes wide and curious. The moment Emeka saw her, his heart stopped for a second. He had expected someone older, but she was just a child, barely taller than his waist. "Good afternoon, sir," she said softly. Emeka crouched down, his voice caught for a second, then he managed to speak. "Did you used to bring food to an old man by the school gate?" Zara nodded slowly, her eyes dimming. "Yes, but he's gone now. I don't know where he went. I looked every day." Emeka swallowed hard. "He's safe," he said gently. "He's my father. He asked for you." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "I called him Grandpa," she said simply. "He said I was his angel." "You were," Emeka said, standing again. "May we speak to your mother?" Zara nodded and ran inside. A minute later, Miriam appeared, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Emeka introduced himself and explained everything. How his father was once a wealthy man, how he vanished after returning to Nigeria, how no one knew what had happened until now. Miriam listened in silence, her face a mixture of shock and emotion. Then, without needing more words, she nodded, and they followed the two visitors back to the palace. The hut behind the northern wall was quiet, the sun casting a warm golden hue over its low thatched roof. The old man sat outside, his face turned toward the light when he saw Zara approaching. Something shifted, his eyes sparkled, his back straightened slightly. He lifted his hand ever so slightly as if reaching for a memory. Zara broke into a run, and the moment she entered his reach, he opened his arms. She hugged him tightly, pressing her small body into his frail frame. He closed his eyes and held her as if anchoring himself to the world again. Emeka watched in awe. His father hadn't responded to anyone for days yet. Here he was, smiling, touching, speaking thank you. Old man whispered as he looked into Zara's face. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for feeding me when the world walked by as if I didn't exist." Zara just smiled and held his hand. Miriam stepped forward quietly, her eyes misty. The old man turned to her gently, taking her hand. "Thank you, madam, for raising this child. You gave more than you know." She lowered her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do much, she did everything." The old man shook his head. "No, you planted the seed." Emeka stepped closer and knelt beside them. "Father, do you remember me?" His father turned to him, blinked, but the light faded again, replaced with the same blank gaze as before. Emeka felt the familiar sting, but didn't let it show. He stood tall and looked at Zara. "Would you like to visit him again?" She nodded quickly. "Every day, if Mama says yes." Miriam nodded as well. "If it brings him peace, then yes." He turned to Zara. "I think you are the key to unlocking something important." His words weren't just gratitude, they were recognition. Over the next week, Zara visited the hut every morning before school, sometimes alone, sometimes with her mother. She brought small packages of food, sometimes yam or fried beans, sometimes ground nuts and biscuits. Every time she arrived, the old man would brighten just slightly and always call her "my little angel." Emeka sat nearby each time, hoping his father might remember more. But it never happened. The name Emeka never lit up his father's eyes. Only Zara's presence did, until the day they had to leave. Emeka and Kalichi had completed their research project. It was time to return to Lagos to prepare his father's relocation. He had already spoken to his sister Ifeoma in the U.S. She was flying into Nigeria the next day. They would all go together and begin the process of helping their father heal. They packed their bags and thanked the king, who blessed them with kind words and farewell gifts as they loaded the car in the early morning light. The old man tugged on Emeka's shirt. "May I see my angel?" "One more time," he asked. Emeka nodded and sent word. Minutes later, Zara arrived with a small cloth bag and something folded in her hand. When the old man saw her, he lit up, his lips parting in a soft smile. "My little angel." She ran to him, hugged him tightly, and held out the folded paper. "It's for you," she said. "It's us in a big car." He opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing made with crayons. 2 stick figures holding hands inside a colorful car, waving at people. Underneath it read, "Goodbye, Grandpa, come back soon." His hands trembled as he held the picture. Tears welled in his eyes again, but this time they didn't fall. He smiled and held her small hands. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered. She smiled and whispered back, "I'll wait for you to come back," and with that she turned and walked back to her mother, waving, until the car vanished down the red dusty road in the back seat of the car. The old man held the drawing tightly on his lap. Staring out the window, Emeka and Kalichi sat on either side, quiet, thoughtful. When they reached Lagos, they went straight to Ifoma's hotel. She had already arrived with tears in her eyes and questions flooding her lips. They all decided to take him back to his old home, the house he had built before leaving America for retirement, the house that had been left in the care of his younger brother, Chidubem. They expected surprise, even joy, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. As they drove through the gates, the front door flew open, and there stood Chidubem. His eyes scanning the vehicle, Emeka stepped out and waved excitedly. "Uncle, it's me. I brought someone." But when Chidubem saw who stepped out behind Emeka, his face drained of color. His mouth fell open. He stumbled back. "Abomination," he screamed, his voice loud and frantic. "You were not supposed to be seen again." His voice cracked with horror, his eyes wide. Everyone froze, even the guards, even if Emeka stared, shocked. "What are you talking about, Uncle? What do you mean?" But Chidubem didn't answer. He backed away, shaking, and then ran inside. Slamming the door behind him, Emeka turned to his father. His father's eyes had changed. They were still distant, but his hands were trembling and his lips began to move ever so slightly, as if trying to remember something hidden behind a thick fog. Emeka stepped forward, trying to press, but stopped. Something heavy was shifting, and whatever it was, it had been buried for years, and now it was clawing its way to the surface. That evening, The atmosphere inside the old house was thick and breathless like the air before a thunderstorm. The compound stood unnaturally quiet, save for the soft creaking of trees and the distant barking of neighborhood dogs inside the car. Emeka sat unmoving, his hand gently resting on his father's trembling shoulder. The old man had not spoken a word since Chidubem screamed and fled into the house. But something in his body language had shifted. There was a tension in the way his fingers curled in his lap, a tightening in his jaw, as if old gears long frozen were beginning to turn again. Emeka exchanged glances with Ifoma, who sat silently on the other side of their father. She had tears in her eyes, but said nothing. Kelechi, who had remained respectfully outside, finally leaned in and said softly, "Do you want me to go in and try speaking with your uncle?" Emeka nodded. But before Kelechi could step out of the car, the front door reopened. Chidubem appeared again, not alone this time, but flanked by his wife and oldest son, both of whom looked deeply confused and worried. His wife held onto his arm, whispering furiously as though trying to calm him down. Chidubem pointed a shaken hand at the car. His voice was hoarse, but clear enough. "I told you we were never supposed to see him again. You promised me he was gone forever." Emeka stepped out of the car slowly and stood between his father and the man who once cradled him as a child. "Uncle, what are you saying? What happened to my father?" Chidubem looked away for a second, then back again, his eyes bloodshot. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "Not now, not like this. You were just a child when he came back to Nigeria. I tried to protect this family, protect our name." Emeka's voice hardened. "Protect us from what you let your own brother live like a ghost for 3 years. Do you have any idea what we went through? We thought he was dead. We searched hospitals, police stations, even morgues." Chidubem opened his mouth to respond, but Ifeoma stepped forward, her voice quiet but "Pearson, did you do something to him? Did you make him disappear?" Chidubem flinched, then turned sharply and walked back into the house, slamming the door again. Emeka's heart pounded in his chest. He looked back at his father, who was now staring at the closed door. His lips twitching slightly, a whisper, barely audible, slipped through his mouth. "Betrayal." Emeka froze and crouched beside him. "Betrayal," he repeated louder. This time a single tear slipped down his cheek and Emeka gently took his father's hand. "Daddy, please try to remember. Tell me what happened." The old man closed his eyes tightly, his shoulders tense, his entire frame trembling. "I trusted him. I came back and I trusted him. Everything was ready. I had the papers, the deeds, the foundation plan, the hospital. He said he'd keep them safe until I settled in. I was tired, so tired I just wanted peace. I stayed one night and then..." Emeka leaned in closer. "Then what happened?" His father took a deep breath and exhaled shakily. He brought me tea, I remember. It was bitter then. Everything went black. I woke up once in a moving vehicle. I was tied, my head pounding. I remember screams, my own screams. Then silence, darkness again. Emeka felt the blood drain from his face. Ifeoma covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "You mean he drugged you?" Daddy nodded slowly and took a long breath. "He left me in the bush in the rain. I wandered for days. I lost my shoes, my mind. I forgot where I was, who I was. Everything blurred like a nightmare that wouldn't end." Emeka stood, shaken with rage. Kelechi, who had stepped back in shock, clenched his fists. This was no longer just a story of loss. This was betrayal, calculated, cold, and cruel. They helped their father into the house and called the police, but the local authorities advised them to wait till morning to take an official statement and file charges against Chidubem, who was now hiding behind his locked doors. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered the mansion, once seen as a symbol of wealth and stability, now housed secrets older than its foundation. Amika made arrangements for a full medical examination for his father, while Efoma prepared the necessary legal documents to reclaim his estate as the days passed. The old man's memory began returning in fragments like pieces of shattered glass fitting slowly back together, and always at the center of his recall was Zara, the little angel. He spoke of her every day, sometimes while awake, sometimes in his sleep. He remembered her kindness with more clarity than he recalled his own bank accounts. When Emeka told him she was safe, that she asked after him every morning, his face would brighten for a moment before sadness returned. "She gave me everything with one lunchbox," he said softly. "One act of kindness in a world that took everything from me." Emeka nodded. "I know, Daddy. We all owe her a debt we can never repay back in Alua village." Zara continued to walk past the neem tree every morning, placing her little parcel of food at the base. Even though Grandpa was gone, she never stopped bringing something, just in case her mother, Miriam, watched her quietly from the window every day. Her heart swelling with pride and worry, equal parts. She knew that something about the bond between her daughter and the old man was larger than coincidence. It felt spiritual, sacred. Days later, Emeka returned to the village, this time in a black SUV with tinted windows. A driver and a gentlewoman who introduced herself as Nurse Rena. They stopped at the same crooked path and walked to Zara's home. Miriam came out first and smiled politely, but her smile turned to surprise when she saw the papers Emeka held out. "These are for you and Zara," he said softly. "An education trust, a monthly stipend, and a relocation offer to a better home near the city." Miriam stood stunned. Her mouth parted. "Sir, this is too much." Emeka shook his head. "No, madam, it's not enough. Your daughter changed our lives. She gave my father back to us when no one else could." Zara emerged from behind her mother, carrying her school bag and blinking curiously. Emeka smiled and knelt in front of her. "Grandpa's doing better. He remembers more now every day, and he talks about you always. He says he misses your food." She grinned shyly. "I still pack food for him every morning." Emeka chuckled. "Well, maybe it's time you brought it to him yourself. Would you like to come to the city and visit?" She looked up at her mother, who smiled with tears in her eyes. "If Mama says yes, then I'd love to go." Miriam nodded. Then Zara clapped her hands with delight. Emeka rose and said softly, "We leave tomorrow, early morning. The house you'll stay in is small, but clean, safe, and close to the private hospital where he's recovering." Miriam placed a hand over her heart, humbled and speechless that night. Zara packed her small school bag with her best clothes, a tiny green dress with missing buttons, a scarf her auntie had given her, and a notebook filled with doodles. The next morning, the sun rose gently over Alua, casting a golden glow on the red earth as the SUV pulled away from the village. Zara pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with wonder at the towns and cities passing by. When they finally reached the private estate in Lagos, the gates swung open, revealing manicured lawns, tall trees, and a fountain that glittered under the morning light. Emeka helped them out of the car and led them to the main house, where Nurse Rena greeted them with warm tea and pastries. Moments later, they walked through the back corridor into a sunroom where the old man, now dressed in a clean caftan and slippers, sat on a cushioned chair reading a newspaper. He looked up, and when his eyes landed on Zara, he stood slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "My little angel." Zara ran to him and hugged him tightly. Her feet barely touching the ground, he held her close. His eyes shining with peace and joy. Behind them, Miriam stood frozen, tears spilling down her face. This was not just a reunion. This was redemption, a full circle of hope born from one act of kindness. And as the morning sun bathed the room in gold, Chief Obinna, Maxwell. Anya held the hand of the girl who reminded him that the world, even in its darkest corners, still held light. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, like soft music playing beneath the chaos of life. Zara woke up each morning in the new house with wide eyes and wonder. She had her own mattress now, her own toothbrush, her own window that opened to the sound of birds, not roosters and goats. Miriam spent her mornings helping Nurse Rena in the kitchen or watering the small garden behind the bungalow, and every afternoon Zara would walk down the tiled hallway to the sunroom where Chief Obinna sat waiting. His eyes always searching the door until they met hers the moment she stepped into view. He would smile every time. It was like watching the sunrise. He called her his anchor, the only thing that had kept his spirit from fading entirely. Sometimes they sat and talked about nothing at all. Sometimes he told her old stories of New York snow that fell like powdered sugar buildings so tall they disappeared into clouds. Streets that sparkled at night like rivers of stars. Zara listened wide-eyed, holding on to every word. Sometimes she drew pictures of the things he described, her crayon versions of skyscrapers and taxis stuck onto the walls of the sunroom with tape. One day she brought him a new drawing of a hospital with the words Obinna Foundation scribbled above the roof. He looked at it for a long time, longer than usual, then folded it carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his caftan. Not everything had returned, not all of his memory, not yet, but there was enough to know he wanted to start over. He wanted to give again, to build again, to protect the light that had found him, the one shaped like a little girl with big eyes. One evening, as the sky turned orange, Emeka returned from a meeting with the family lawyer. He looked tired but focused. He gathered Miriam, Zara, Afoma, and Nurse Rena in the main sitting room and shared what had been finalized. The legal documents restoring Chief Obinna's assets had been approved thanks to his partial recovery and the testimonies from the hospital psychologist. His estate was once again his, the house, the businesses, the bank accounts, and with them came the responsibility to decide what to do with the truth. Chidubem had gone into hiding after the initial confrontation. Rumors swirled that he had left the city. Some said he was trying to buy silence. Others said he had already fled the country. Emeka had filed formal charges with the police, attempted fraud, unlawful detainment, abuse of power. But it would take time for the system to move. Real justice always seemed to crawl in places where wealth had shadows, but that didn't mean they would wait. Emeka looked over at Miriam and Zara. "There is something we want to do," he said softly. "Something to honor what she gave us." Ifeoma stood holding a small red file. She opened it and passed it to Miriam. Inside was a printed page with a logo at the top. The Obinna Zara Anya Foundation for Girls. "It is a scholarship fund," Emeka explained, "for girls in underserved communities. We're starting in Alua. First, every year we will sponsor 20 girls from villages like yours through full education from primary to university level in your daughter's name." Miriam stared at the paper, her hands trembling. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just say yes." Ifeoma replied, smiling through tears. Zara looked up, eyes wide. "I don't understand." Emeka bent down. "This means many girls like you will get to go to school even when their families can't pay. Just like you did, and they'll know it started because of your kindness." Zara turned to her mother, who nodded through tears. "Kay," she said slowly, "I want them to go to school too." It was simple for her. It had always been simple. Give what you have, do what you can. Chief Obinna smiled from the couch. "She is wiser than many men I've known in my lifetime." The days turned into weeks, and the story of the girl who fed a stranger who turned out to be a billionaire spread like wildfire across the state, then across the country. Newspapers ran features headlines like this: "Angel of Alua," and "How a Lunchbox Saved a Life." Television crews came knocking. Miriam refused most interviews politely, but allowed one reporter from a local Christian radio station to visit. She only had one message: "I didn't raise her to be famous. I raised her to be kind." Kindness is not a miracle, it's a decision not everyone understood, but those who did. They remembered when the school in Alua received a letter announcing the renovation funded by the new foundation. The headmistress broke down in tears when the first batch of girls were handed their scholarships and uniforms bearing a small embroidered angel. The village held a dance at the square. Old women sang praises. Children chanted Zara's name. And for the first time in years, joy overflowed like a river without banks. Back in Lagos, Chief Obinna began writing again every morning after his bath. He sat at a small table by the window with a pen and notebook. He wrote letters not just to his children, but to strangers, to anyone who might one day need to read the words of a man who once had everything, lost it, and found something better through the hands of a child. One evening, as Zara brought him his tea, she noticed something new on the bookshelf. A photograph of the two of them taken just days ago. He had framed it. Beside it was her first drawn, the one with the big car, and the words, "Goodbye, Grandpa, come back soon." He saw her looking and chuckled. "I came back, didn't I?" She grinned. "You did, Grandpa, but you forgot your socks that day." He laughed for the first time in a long time, a deep, rolling laugh that shook his chest and filled the room with sunshine. Emeka watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. The man who once wandered streets, forgotten by the world, was whole again, not just in body, but in spirit. Zara had stitched him back together without meaning to, and the world now knew it, not because they sought recognition, but because stories like these cannot be hidden. Like sunlight, they burst through the cracks, whether we want them to or not. Months passed, and when the Obinna Zara Foundation opened its new headquarters just outside Makurdi City, Zara was there in a small white dress holding the ribbon with Chief Obinna beside her in his cream agbada, smiling like a king. The crowd cheered as she cut the ribbon and the cameras flashed, but she didn't pose. She just turned to him and whispered, "Did I do it right, Grandpa?" He bent and kissed her forehead. "You did it better than I ever could have." The journey that had started with a lunchbox had bloomed into something far bigger than either of them imagined. And yet for Zara, it had never really changed. Every morning, she still said good morning with a smile to the security man at the gate. She still shared her chin-chin with the girl next to her at school, and every Sunday night before bed, she still packed a small extra snack for the following day just in case someone she passed might need it. Kindness, after all, wasn't something you do once, it was something you become, and she had become a light that even the darkest betrayal could not extinguish. And in the heart of the man who had been lost and found again, she would always be more than a memory. She would be the moment everything changed, the little girl who gave hope in a box and received the world in return.